Hello and welcome to this event on protecting your Kubernetes environment with Cisco and Kasten by Veeam. Special thanks to our friends at Veeam and Cisco for joining us on the event today. This is going to be an expert discussion on how best to protect your Kubernetes environment. Before we get started, there's just a few things that you should know. First off, thanks so much for joining us. My name is David Davis of Actual Tech Media, and I'll be serving as your host. We want this to be an educational event, and we encourage your questions there in the questions pane of your audience console. We'll be answering those questions live at the end of the discussion today, so keep those questions coming. We even have a best question prize to help encourage your questions. I'll talk more about that here in just a moment. I also want to encourage you to check out the Handouts tab. It's there that you'll find a number of resources for additional information on the solutions that you'll be learning about on the webinar today from Veeam and Cisco. At the end of the event, I'll be announcing the winner of our Amazon $300 gift card door prize. If you're watching this on demand, of course, that drawing has already occurred. The prize terms and conditions can be found there in the Handouts tab. And then, as I mentioned, we also have our Best Question prize for an additional Amazon $50 gift card. Prize winners must have asked a question and meet the Actual Tech Media prize terms and conditions. We'll select the best question after the event and contact you via email. And with that, I'm excited now to introduce you to today's expert presenters. Welcome, Mark Poland, Solutions Architect at Veeam, Matt Ferguson, Director of Product Management at Cisco, and Gaurav Rishi, Vice President of Product at Kasten by Veeam. Mark, I'll first hand it off to you. Take it away.
Okay, thank you, David. Really pleased to be here today with Gaurav and Matt talking about Veeam, Kasten by Veeam, and Cisco Intersight Kubernetes Service. What I'd like to do is ask Gaurav to kick it off for us, talking about Kubernetes in the market.
Thanks, Mark. And, definitely a pleasure to be here, especially with old colleagues like Matt, but, a new thing, which is Kubernetes. And really, every time I create the slide, it's time to update it, which just shows the dynamism required in this world. But if you look at that first graphic, which says 500 million new applications by 2024, that's a staggering statistic, right? Just to put it into perspective, what that is saying is we collectively are creating more applications in this few years than we have created over the last 40 years combined. So a lot of these cloud-native applications now are being built on principles which are creating the best of microservices and are being packaged as containers, which increasingly are using Kubernetes as the orchestration layer. In fact, that's the default layer now. And that's what the second piece out here is talking about, which is more than 85% of the enterprises are in fact running these applications in production. And now once you have these applications in production, you need to make sure that all of your day two services are up and running. And what I mean by day two services is making sure that things like backup, disaster recovery, and with Kubernetes, people expect portability to be able to move applications around clusters and so on are also in place. And so what we realized is customers are increasingly figuring out that, look, your existing backup tools built for the hypervisor eras don't work in this new world where you have containers and the dynamism that we alluded to. So a majority of the enterprises, and this number keeps on picking up, are looking for solutions which are built for this Kubernetes-native era to be able to protect your applications. So that, in a nutshell, is some of the dynamism that we are seeing in this Kubernetes and cloud-native world, and it's global. Mark, this is another sort of market trend, which is also super exciting, and I'll keep this interactive, but we kind of internally joke that Kubernetes is really the next wave of infrastructure. And it's really not a joke in some sense, because it truly is. It's abstracting away a lot of the complexity of underlying infrastructure components, but it also allows you to work with high velocity to create these plethora of applications that I alluded to. But maybe I'll just ask Matt to add a little more about, from his perspective, what is it that he's seeing?
Gaurav, Appreciate it. By the way, very excited to be a part of this because I think, as you highlighted, the change and rapid pace of these applications, I mean, staggering 500 million applications. And we know those applications are really starting to transition to more of a modular framework, which really is about containers and Kubernetes when you think about it at the end of the day. And then on top of it, I mean, they're moving. These applications aren't necessarily always going to be in your massive or large scale data centers. They're distributed. They're going to be at different locations, remote, edge locations as well, and hybrid. So hybrid becomes a real, I think, in this day and age, it really becomes the real main point at which we are talking about. And IT requires to transform themselves, and in order to manage these workloads and applications and be able to do that. So it's a lot going on. And I apologize if you hear my dog in the background.
You know, it's interesting that your dog has excited my dog.
I think this is perfect timing for the mailman to arrive.
That's right. Isn't this the new norm with Zoom? That's the first one I've had. But
let's see if we can still work through this.
Yeah, that's funny. All right, we'll go on with that distraction and keep it real.
Anything else?
I think Matt, to your point, hybrid clouds definitely seeing that across the globe. Doesn't matter what vertical we're talking about, whether it's financials or whether we are talking about retail. I think, and for a variety of reasons, whether it's because of cost reasons or regulatory reasons, compliance reasons, I think we are definitely seeing that. And so I completely agree with you. And I was talking about the fact that portability is almost expected as a byproduct of Kubernetes, and that is indeed quite exciting for us. The other point I wanted to pick up, which I know is listed out here as stateful applications, is a lot of these applications that we're talking about, which are new and are exploding in terms of production, ultimately they're made up of state. And what I mean by that is, let's take a retail application. You are going to have a shopping cart. You're going to have customers come in, buy stuff. You need to maintain that state about what's being bought, by whom, and all of that is stored in a variety of data services. And these databases or data services under the covers in this cloud native world actually have increased or multiplied is maybe the right way to put it, where people are using SQL, NoSQL, graph databases under the covers. And these make up a majority of the production applications. In fact, the CNCF survey had them at more than 55% the last time they did the survey in 2020, and I'm sure it's increased, of all of the production applications having stateful as the key component in there. So as you go ahead and have these applications increase, and then they have state in them, it makes it all the more interesting for the operations teams, like you said, to not only reinvent themselves, but also make sure that they're able to scale to protect them. So that's maybe some of the key secular trends that we are seeing in this world, Mark.
All right, Eddie, any other points you want to cover before we move on?
Well,
I think, go ahead. Sorry, man.
No, I mean, Gaurav, you covered it, I think, really, really well. And I think at the end of the day, when you talk about stateful applications, the criticality of those workloads, right, really comes to the forefront. And we really think about enterprise and what it means to have secure, as well as other types of governance and policies associated with those secured applications. And though now we're really taking that enterprise grade to a container ecosystem, to a Kubernetes ecosystem that I think operationally IT is looking for whenever they start moving into new technology like this.
Absolutely. No, I think that covered it well, Mark.
Yeah, thank you. And Matt, I think you're gonna start off with this slide.
Yeah, Gaurav and Mark, you hit the problem statement, head on. Which at the end of the day, when we think about workloads, we think about stateful workloads, enterprise applications. We think about locations, where those applications may actually be residing and performing. We think about the pressure of an IT organization that they're always on, that they always are looking to become that area or that organization that controls the governance, the policy, the security. And then they have a lot of demands on them. You know, the development teams, the cloud architects, the line of business owners, you know, in order to move at the pace of cloud, really, you need to move beyond human scale. And that's what we're talking about. And this is why Cisco's really invested in, you know, really solving this for IT organizations. And we're really working on with the infra and ops organizations, and we're working with developing new capabilities within our platform called Innersight in order to address a lot of these issues, because agility is and speed are one thing. The other corollary, though, is the cost, the performance, you know, the new technologies, the hybrid nature of cloud, all have to be maintained, governed, and controlled. And you have to be able to have those, all the information, the telemetry coming in, all the ability to deploy, harden, secure, you know, cloud native stacks that you feel comfortable that you can actually, you know, put policy around and governance. So that's really what Cisco's doing and involved in this space when it comes to, you know, Kubernetes, when it comes to enabling IT organizations to move faster. And so that's, you know, I think one of the elements why I'm really excited with working with, you know, Kasten and K10 by Veeam is we get to bring the confidence of Cisco and Innersight and the backup, restore, the data recovery of Kasten and K10 together. And that's exciting.
Yeah, Matt, you know, this resonates really well with what we see too in this DevOps, or, you know, at times we've heard words like sec DevOps world, where there is a general shift towards a shift left principle. And I think the lines are in some sense becoming blurrier, right, between sort of the ops and the application teams. But at the same time, the operation teams are feeling the pressure, like you pointed out, to make sure that they have the secure, scalable platform available. And I think why we are so thrilled to kind of be working along with Cisco is because I think, like you said, you know, moving beyond human scale. I mean, I think I love that phrase. We'll incorporate it. But the point we are seeing is automation in the operation tasks to be able to get to that scale, so you can automatically go ahead and protect applications that the app developers are introducing into your cluster at a furious pace, is something that resonates really well with the organizations that we work with. And so it's so complementary, where you have Kasten K10 bringing in all of these capabilities for data protection, and you've got Cisco providing you this Intersight hybrid cloud services that helps them scale and get this done in a really quick fashion. So I think that's really the basis of what we are talking about here.
Perfect.
Yeah. And Matt, can you talk more about Innersight Kubernetes Service?
Absolutely. As we're talking about, there's a journey. There's a journey that organizations are going through, IT organizations specifically are going through, to adopt new technology, to have the confidence of enterprise scale, to have the confidence of secure and hardened, you know, workloads and stacks. And Innersight is a number of integrations. It's a platform, first and foremost. It's a SaaS delivered platform, and where we are talking and working with our customers, and we are bringing together capabilities of not only managing infrastructure, but we also are now looking at cost and performance and how these workloads, and bringing all that information in order to make intelligent insights into actions. And one of the services, and there's many of them in Innersight, one of the services is the Innersight Kubernetes Service. So we take, you know, the standard open source CNCF Kubernetes, we take the responsibility of hardening that for our customers. We take the responsibility of packaging that up, because Kubernetes does involve a number of different curated, you know, software to be included in that, whether it's your container network interface, your storage interface, your load balancers. There's a lot of software and a lot of open source software, and this is a really good thing. You get the innovation, the power of that open source software, but the confidence for enterprise in order to be able to deploy that, to put the policy around that, the governance, that's really what the Innersight Kubernetes Service does. So it takes in the control plane of the deployment of your Kubernetes and be able to take that and then deploy that on-prem into your data center. And then it just reduces your risk. It provides all that confidence of automation. And so we start there. And so that's really what the Kubernetes service is doing. But back to the why we're having this conversation, really why we want to have the conversation with enterprise and IT organizations and customers in order to protect their data, right? We're providing with the Kubernetes service a control plane for consistency, for governance, for ensuring that you have a secure stack to ride, to have your applications deployed on. But the K10 solution, the Kasten K10 solution, does all that backup, does all that data recovery, and all that application mobility for the application, the users and the application. And that's a really important problem to solve, because there's a lot of security, there's a lot of ransomware out there. And I think, bringing these two solutions together really solves that. And I think, Gaurav, what you've done with Kasten K10 and really addressing, that application disaster recovery and backup, solves that enterprise problem of how do I secure that really important data for our customers.
Yeah, no, that's right, Matt. I think, before I jump into this one, I do want to point out that I think in your previous slide, you had simplification and simple as sort of the key word there in the very first one. And that really resonates, because Kubernetes, I know you and I and Mark are talking about it, but it's still relatively young, right? It's 6.5 years young is the way I like to joke about it at this point of time. And so together to make, like you said, you've got the curated add-ons as a part of IKS, and you've got IKS being, of course, Intersight Kubernetes Service. So we already have that abbreviated form from our perspective, coupled with the Kasten K10, does make applications which are growing so fast, a snap to be able to bring up, to scale, and then to be able to protect, right? But to talk about this, really, when you pointed out these cloud-native applications are growing and so on, I did want to spend a minute just to talk about what these cloud-native applications look like, right? And so if you look at this graphic, and it's a very simplified graphic of a cloud-native application, and everything you see inside that dotted line is really what might be representative of what a cloud-native application is composed of. So in this particular case, you've got a load balancer, you've got a few pods. This one has 2 microservices, a left branch and a right branch, as you see out here. One of the microservices is connected to some sort of a hard drive, right? So maybe under the covers, that could be a spinning media, or it could be an SSD. And the second microservice has its state, but it's connected to some database, right? That database, again, could be a SQL, NoSQL database, which could be running in your own cluster, or maybe it's composing and interfacing with something of a managed database, where it's something like an Amazon RDS, or you have new operator-based databases running outside of the cluster. And then the application itself, and this is where even more dynamism comes into the picture, is you've got a lot of the state information, your network, compute, storage information as config maps and secrets, and that makes up hundreds, if not thousands, of little objects inside your Kubernetes world, which also need to be protected. So first of all, when it comes to these applications, they're made up these components. These components, like you were pointing out earlier, Matt, are always getting rescheduled by Kubernetes to different physical nodes under the covers. And what you want from an application provider's perspective and a business owner's perspective is to be able to back up the entire application, not just one database or one particular persistent volume, which is your underlying storage, but you want to be able to back that up. And when the time comes, maybe because you've been hit by a ransomware and you want to recover to a known good state, you want to be able to bring up that application. And that's exactly what Kasten K10 does. It can automatically discover the applications that have been introduced into the Cisco Intersight cluster. It can automatically allow you to define policies, whether it's gold, silver, talk about how often they need to be backed up and where they need to be backed up. And it can back those applications up, but store the state in a way which is agnostic to the underlying infrastructure, so that when the time comes, you can go ahead and rehydrate that application in this hybrid cloud environment that you were talking about as one of the key trends. And then because these applications are made up of multiple microservices, it is quite important to make sure that, let's say microservice 2 has a dependency that it should not be rehydrated unless microservice 1 is already up and running. And so those rules need to be codified in and should be extensible. And that's another thing that Kasten K10 does out of the box for some of the most commonly used data patterns, but it also allows you as a customer or a user of Kasten K10 to be able to extend that or write new ones without waiting for a code drop from either Cisco or from Kasten for it. And that's really how we go ahead and get the constructs of backup and mobility in this dynamic cloud native world. So hopefully, Mark, that gives a top level view, at least in terms of the moving parts and the approach that we take together.
It does. And in this hybrid world, it sounds like not only can you do the backup and recovery, the cloud mobility, but also if something horrible happened to your primary data center where you're hosting this application, you could very straightforwardly recover this, fail over into a public cloud infrastructure.
Oh, no, absolutely. And do that granularly, by the way. So you can pick and choose that you might want to go ahead and pick only these particular components to be brought up because of whatever the application requirements are. And do this in a smart way where Kasten K10, when it does recover, can go ahead and realize that the underlying infrastructure has changed. And now instead of using the spinning media disk that I was talking about, needs to be brought up in a GP2 instance, or the underlying infrastructure is EBS, which is the Amazon Elastic Block Store. It can go and change the storage class without requiring you to recode the application. And so that's really, the technology behind portability that Kasten provides.
Okay. Do you want to talk to this one, Gaurav?
Yeah, so we make it sound very simple, and it is, which I wanted to point out. But I do want to acknowledge that, a lot of work has gone between the Cisco and the Kasten teams to get the integrations in place and make it simple. So maybe I'll just spend a minute and I'll let Matt add more to it. But really to walk through this simple stack, and no picture is complete without a stack diagram in our presentations, given the technologists here. But if you look at it at the bottom layer, you've got your compute, storage, networking infrastructure. And Cisco, of course, has a really rich portfolio of that, everything from UCS, Hyperflex, and converged infrastructure. Matt talked about the Cisco Intersight Kubernetes Service, which allows you to abstract that underlying infrastructure, gets you that upstream Kubernetes layer. And Kasten K10, which is a co-product from Kasten by Veeam, itself is a cloud native application. You install it in the cluster, and it has been integrated into the Cisco Intersight Kubernetes Service. So that's how it talks and recognizes all of the various applications that various developers might have introduced on the Cisco cluster. And it also is integrated into the underlying infrastructure layer. So it can do things like storage snapshots and be efficient about it so that you can go ahead and do that backup that I talked about. But additionally, I was alluding to this when I said, look, we already have extensible ways to capture the dynamism of being able to define the workflow of microservice 2 coming up after microservice 1 is up. And the way that's done is through what we call application blueprints. So Kasten K10 also has integrations into some of the most common applications, whether it's a Mongo or an Amazon RDS or a PostgreSQL database. And these blueprints are available as open source. And so they can be used as they are, or they can be extended, like I said, independently. And so you would now have a way to be able to do backups, not only at the underlying storage layer, but also for cases where you require a higher level of consistency work at the logical layer, which is at the database layer. So that's the level of integrations that have been done. And that's really, at the end of the day, that provides these operations teams that we've been talking about this benefit of doing seamless backup, disaster recovery, and the app mobility between clusters or regions or clouds, even, so that you can actually work at scale. So again, maybe a longer set of information and more detail than some people might care about, but at some point, this is really what captures the seamless behavior between the two companies. Matt, I don't know if you want to add more to that, but that's really the bird's eye view here.
Yeah, no, Gaurav, I think a picture's worth 1,000 words, and in order to really simplify a lot of the hard integrations that we've done is really to take that stack and provision that and have all the inventory associated with it. And this is where Innersight is really shining through from a Cisco perspective. And what we're doing at Cisco is we know the complexity IT organizations have to deal with day in, day out. We know that there is infrastructure, not only Cisco infrastructure, but there's also third party, and then we also know that workloads are migrating to the public cloud. In order to understand or at least manage that inventory, Innersight has been instrumental in really sort of bringing that into one umbrella. But then we know that's just the physical topology or that physical infrastructure, but we have to think about the vertical stack. And a lot of times, what gets missed when we talk about containerized workloads is they do ride on a virtual machine. So now we have layers of software in order to think about the inventory associated with that, the performance associated with that inventory, the costs associated with that inventory. And so not only are we at Cisco looking at the overall hardware domain, we're looking at your virtual machines or the containers on those virtual machines that are in Kubernetes clusters. So that's a lot of technology to deal with there. So you have the inventory, you have the cost, you have the performance. And then we always, rule number one, whenever we think about any integration, is we automate. We automate for simplicity's sake. So we bring that together. We're able to deploy, or we're able to manage, or we're able to orchestrate all that software as well as that hardware under a single platform. And we're integrating not only with Cisco other products that we have from a networking perspective, from a security, from an app performance monitoring with App Dynamics. We're integrating with our ecosystem, our best of breed partners like Kasten by K10 and Kasten K10 by Veeam, in order to do a lot of that enterprise grade backup, data recovery, and application mobility. Why? Because enterprise applications are changing. If you think about a stateful application, a lot of times the first question I might have is, why would you put that in a Kubernetes environment, right? And we're now seeing the benefits of the CI/CD pipelines, the developer requirements that are looking for that integration, but that deployment model that containers provide, and then the flexibility, the abstraction of that application platform in order to take the best of that stateful application and deploy it where it may perform best, where it may be cost efficient, where it may be co-located maybe with the data that actually provides the service, or the latency, or the low latency, or the actual data gravity where it may reside. So you bring that all together, that's a tremendous amount of complexity. That's a tremendous amount of responsibility that our IT organizations have to take in order to take a lot of already existing infrastructure, already existing software and solutions, and move that into this new cloud native landscape that we're talking about. And that's why, when we bring these solutions together, we really look to our enterprise organizations to, we're solving a real problem for them.
Yeah,
and that's the exciting part.
That's exactly right. That's well said. And maybe Mark, that teases us up well to talk about what this looks like in action, which is exactly what I was asking you bring up. So maybe, I think Matt made a lot of good points out there. And so the way to visualize this really and see how this all comes together is a good, let's talk about that. So let's assume you are an enterprise application owner, and like many application owners, like you pointed out, you do see both a presence on premises, as well as maybe some of the workloads are being put into a public cloud, or maybe for disaster recovery reasons, you do want to move over to a public cloud too, right? And by the way, it could be vice versa also, because we see for a variety of reasons, whether it's cost or regulatory, the actions moving the other way. But regardless, let's take the first point out here. A way to think about it is, we already talked about the fact what a cloud native application looks like and why you want to keep the cloud native application as a unit of atomicity and not the hypervisor or the VM, like Matt was pointing out. So the way this works is, let's assume you have on your left-hand side what we're calling a source infrastructure, which could be on premises. It's of course got your compute, networking, and Kubernetes infrastructure. And Matt talked about the entire stack from a Cisco Intersight perspective. And then Kasten K10, like I pointed out, is another cloud native application which runs on that cluster, but it's a special application because not only can it recognize all the other applications running out there, using that automation, which is critical in today's world, it can automate the backup aspects of it. So you have the application level snapshots at the logical database level, at the volume snapshot level, and then store all of that information in a portable form into a resilient store. We've said object store, it could be NAS, it could be, by the way, the Veeam backup replication server. And the reason it's resilient, and that's so important, is Kasten K10, by the way, was also the first one to go ahead and come up with a solution that allows you to work in a Kubernetes ransomware recovery environment. And that's really important because, unfortunately, it's hard to miss the news around all of these ransomware attacks that we see. So by taking a combination of taking these backups, moving them to a resilient store where we can exercise flags like immutability, you can define how long should your backups never be touched. So even if you might have some malwares or attacks percolate down into your clusters, you want to make sure your backups remain your last line of defense. And that's really something that Kasten can go ahead and work with Cisco to make sure that stays alive. And then for a variety of reasons, whether it's DR or whether it's for cloud migration related reasons that Matt mentioned, you can take that and move all of these applications out into a public cloud, whether that's AWS or Azure or GCP or IBM. You have a rich set of choices. Kasten K10, we ourselves, by the way, release every 2 weeks. So we've got a lot of automation and built-in tests that happen every night. And so we are qualified with the latest versions of what you see as the moving parts across these on-prem and source infrastructures. And so you can also go ahead and then rehydrate these applications. And like we talked about earlier, do this in a way which is A, automated, so you can have import and export policies that are going in, and B, do it so that you're abstracted away from the underlying infrastructure, so it's simple for you. If you have your hardware change and your applications can be changed because of the underlying storage classes being reconfigured, Kasten K10 does that for you. And then very importantly, the Intersight hybrid cloud platform. That's what provides this bridge. So you can go ahead and make sure that you've got the visibility into all of these applications that now span across this distributed environment, and might be a mix of IKS, which is running on your on-premises location, but maybe it's Amazon EKS, which is running on your cloud infrastructure, and you still get the visibility and control with the Intersight hybrid cloud platform. So that's how it all comes together. But let me pause here again. Matt, let me know if I've captured this or other points you would like to add.
You just, total package. I think you hit it out of the park with everything you said there. I'll acknowledge one of the areas that why would Cisco be a part of a public cloud, environment? And I think you hit it. You really sort of emphasize, when we think about the hybrid cloud platform in Innersight specifically, we're looking at not only resources that would be on-prem, but your resources that are in the public cloud. In those resources, either, Innersight can provide the observability of those resources. They can look at the performance. They could look at the cost. They could, with Kubernetes service, we are going through an adoption motion. So even if your clusters are in the public cloud, Innersight can adopt those clusters in order to start working with, Kasten K10, for example, and our other ecosystem partners. But that's really where Cisco's evolving. Of course, we're absolutely involved from a networking perspective, and we're obviously very much involved in our security portfolio, and we have a lot of other capabilities to bring to the table. But Innersight and what we're doing there really sort of brings a lot of that from not only your infrastructure that maybe been around for a number of years to where things are going with public cloud and cloud native, and starts bringing that under that common umbrella. So I think your example of an application and its requirements for data resiliency, but on top of it, the importance we are hearing, and as I talk to customers, ransomware and that security, that application security and backup and restore, that is top of mind in a lot of our customers. And I think, this use case that you're highlighting here is a perfect example of the two companies working together, providing a really critical, important solution.
Well said again, Matt. So no, this has been fun. So I think, Mark, I'll hand it back to you because I think we captured a lot here.
Yeah, thanks, guys. This has been a great conversation. I just want to touch on a couple of things before we open it up for questions, and that is, what if you want more? So we've got a couple of QR code or 3 QR codes here. One is for an ebook on the 5 Kubernetes backup best practices. There's also a Cisco Veeam global partner page. Now, this is more than just what we've been talking about today. This is really represents the entire portfolio, things that we didn't touch on, talking about Veeam backup and replication and Cisco UCS and things like that, but lots of great resources on the Cisco Veeam partner page. And then, for you guys or you folks out there that, seeing is believing, please, go ahead and try Kasten out. K10, I should say, is the product name. Very easy to get started. Get the product. You could stand up the product in well under an hour and try it in your own environment. So with that, why don't we see if we've got any questions from the audience? All right, we do in fact have questions, and thank you for putting those into the question window. Let me start with you, Gaurav. Mike asks, does this solution allow me to move applications across clusters and the cloud?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Mark and Eric. So no, absolutely. So I think the picture we were showing the graphic on, where we were actually moving the applications as a unit of atomicity across not only clusters, availability zones, regions, and even these hybrid environments, which could be on-premises to cloud was what the picture showed, but also between clouds, right? So definitely that is indeed the portability point I was trying to make, and that is supported. So I can, I will definitely encourage you to just send out a quick note to support@kasten.io or go to the resources pages that Mark was pointing out, and we'd be happy to engage and talk about it in the context of your specific environment.
All right, thank you. And Matt, to you, the question about from Kenneth that he needs to meet compliance and security requirements. So can you talk a little bit about the security and compliance aspects of IKS?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Kenneth was specifically asking around zero trust, and that's a hot topic. Security, let alone, is a hot topic, but now we talk about zero trust. And zero trust is just as much an operating framework as it is, with technology components as well. I would say, depending on where or what level and granularity you're looking at to implement zero trust, because it spans everything from secrets management to API to tokens to ensuring that your machine or API calls are very much secured. And I would say that there's a number of areas that we implement zero trust. We have an ability to instantiate within the Kubernetes cluster or IKS cluster a new tool that actually was just launched this week called Service Mesh Manager. Service Mesh Manager is a lifecycle managed Istio deployment with an ability to look at your API traffic as well as secure and ensure that your traffic is MTLS encrypted. So that would be an example of a level of zero trust to ensure that each API call from each microservice is encrypted via MTLS, and you are able to visualize that, you're able to track that, and you're able to see that as an addition, an extension to IKS. There are obviously open source tools. Actually, Cisco is involved in the open source community, and there's another one called API Clarity. It's more of an API, an awareness of and tracking of, looking at those APIs that are, or machine-to-machine microservice API calls are, you're tracking them and you're logging them and you're, ensuring that maybe an untrusted device might be talking to an internal microservice. So there's layers to zero trust. I know that doesn't address all the aspects of zero trust, but it definitely is starting to, get you on your way in that journey to zero trust implementation.
All right, thanks, Matt. Bradford has a question. I believe, actually, I think this might go to both you guys, but let's start with Gaurav. Does this solution, K10 in this case, provide an ability to utilize a graphical user interface or a command line interface with the migration of applications between clouds and on-prem?
All right, thanks for that. Bradford, I think that's a great question, actually very topical. So the short answer is yes to both, but just to add a little more color to it on the Kasten K10 side of it, we see, customers are in different points of the journey into Kubernetes and productizing. And so there's some customers who love to be able to just use the Kasten 10 user interface. In fact, that's one of the most loved features I'm going to add about the product, because it makes it super simple. It's very intuitive, snap to set policies, auto discovers the applications. And but the way we've actually architected the product is that the user interface itself is built on the Kubernetes APIs and commands there. So we are Kubernetes-native itself. So we also have customers who are further in the journey who would like to not necessarily look at UX. Matt used this phrase around working or moving beyond human scale. And so there's a lot of automation where people like to wire up and create things like Prometheus wired up to PagerDuty and work in the API world. And so that's also definitely supported and productized. So that's sort of the color, depends on where you are in your journey. And you might start with UX and then as you graduate, use more and more of the API related pieces, or sort of live within the UX, right? Or a mix of both. So that's really the answer from a K10 perspective. I'll let Matt add more from his perspective.
Yeah, from a Kubernetes, Innersight Kubernetes as well as Innersight itself, the quick answer is yes to both. Innersight is a graphical user interface platform. It's a SaaS delivered platform, and you can create via policies, templates, consistent Kubernetes deployments via the GUI. Additionally, because it is a SaaS platform, every GUI interaction that you have has a corresponding API. So you are able to drive Innersight via APIs if you are familiar with, a particular language that is your favorite. We also provide an SDK. And last but not least, we also work very closely with HashiCorp. And we do have a Terraform provider for Innersight, and you can drive every Kubernetes deployment via Terraform plan as well. So yes to both.
All right, thanks. Appreciate that. Jorge, this is a high-level question, and I'm gonna make this a jump ball for you guys. Jorge is asking, when management asks us, what is Kubernetes? What's the simplest definition we can give?
Matt, you want to take that one first?
Great.
I can give you my non-technical answer.
Thanks, Gaurav.
Everybody answer that.
I love this question. There's a famous Dilbert comic strip out there, if you haven't seen it, where Dilbert is talking to management, and all management says is Kubernetes, and he says you can't just say Kubernetes to make you look smart. And I think sometimes we get lost in the technology and how rapidly it's evolving. But if you think about the evolution of cloud, and you think about where we've come from, we talked about monolithic servers with monolithic applications. That's one, step in the journey. We abstracted that hardware, and we did that with virtual machines. And that's where the hypervisor came in. The next layer on top of that is where you abstracted the operating system with containers. So you see these levels of abstraction that are starting to emerge, and that abstraction of the operating system with containers is really at the level at which Kubernetes plays. And when you have an ability to have a container that's abstracted from the operating system, it allows for a lot of this portability. It allows for a lot of this ephemeral nature of what containers are, meaning they are able to spin up rapidly and be torn down rapidly. And this move to a number of microservices where they're actually dependent on each other. So my quick answer is, what Kubernetes does is it orchestrates and manages these fleet of containers. So it's an orchestration tool. And you use the declarative model, which is a very new, if you're into the 12-factor application, development, mantra, it is about declaratively telling Kubernetes how you would like to orchestrate containers. How many would you like? Where would you like them? What happens if they don't show up? How often would you like to bring them up, tear them down, and orchestrate them? That's me. Gaurav?
Yeah, no, that's well said. I think in my case, management has a much shorter attention span. So I usually get away with, hey, look, it's the next generation distributed operating system for these cloud native applications. And I think will be hated by the purists and others alike. But I think it does capture the point that you do have an increasing number of services. You do have, like you pointed out, increasing number of applications being containerized, and you have this fleet in hybrid deployment architectures. And so you do need this next generation of an operating system which is truly built in for this distributed environment. And that's really what Kubernetes under the covers really is. So yeah, hopefully that's enough, Mark.
Yeah, no, that's great. Appreciate it. And the final question, which actually I think I'm qualified to answer, which is amazing to myself. Will Kasten be available on the Cisco price list? The answer is yes, it is. In fact, the Kasten SKUs went live on October 11th of this year. So you can go ahead and put together a bill of materials that includes Cisco products, Veeam products, and Kasten by Veeam K10 as well. So with that, I will hand it back to David to see who won the prize.
Absolutely. Yeah. Great questions. Great discussion. Thank you so much, Mark, Gaurav, and Matt. I really enjoyed that. I learned a lot. I know the audience did as well. I do want to announce now the winner of our Amazon $300 gift card. This is going out to Jonathan Trong from California. Congratulations. We'll reach out to deliver that gift card, and also our best question prize winner as well. Before we go, I want to remind everyone, don't forget about the really cool QR codes that are on the screen right now, the 5 Kubernetes backup best practices, the Cisco Veeam global partner page, and the Kasten free trial. You can try this out for yourself. So make sure that you check those out before we wrap up here. Again, thank you to our friends at Veeam and Cisco for joining us on the webinar today. We'll see you next time. Have a great day.